So I go out biking in the evenings because, pandemic. And I took this picture of a lovely little field, and I thought I'd try to make a little watercolor out of it. So I've got a board tilted at an angle. I've just got typical watercolors. I use artist colors. And I tried to draw a little bit in. The video is sped up to 3 times the actual speed. Here I'm wetting the paper a little bit because I thought maybe I could get a soft sun if I did that sort of thing. Well, when you put wet pigment in top of wet paper, it gets a little loose. Then I tried some cerulean blue to make it sort of merge together, and you got to be a little careful because blue and yellow make green. And in fact, you can see I got green because I didn't clean my brush too well. But I kept going. Does it look like it's going too well right now? No. But watercolors are tough, as everybody that does a watercolor knows. So I keep it flat for a little while because as soon as I put it on an angle, it all runs down and then the sun looks worse. So I said to myself, should I continue on or should I just give it a rest? Well, I kept going and I thought, well, at worst you can see how sometimes watercolor paintings go bad. So I'm putting a little bit of the slope in, starting with a little lighter color at the top. Getting a little darker as I go down, trying to throw in some different colors. Putting in some warm, a little bit of cool, some little hard edges. And now I'm doing it. It's wet on dry. And just placing a lot of color. So a traditional watercolor, what you do is you typically do a first coat, and I probably made this too dark for a first coat. And then you'll go over top of it with some darkers, and then you go with your final darks. So usually you have 3 layers. A first initial wash, then a little bit of your main color, and then your dark shadows. I should have waited till it was a little bit drier, but I thought, I'm in a hurry. And I started putting in some colors, and I went for a group of trees instead of single trees like the photograph. Mostly because that's what happened. It didn't stay as individual trees, so I went with it. About now I'm going, I don't know about this. But when in doubt, add lots more paint. Trying to make the trees a little darker. Little bit of shadow. And you can see I'm kind of thinking it's a 1-point perspective, so the shadows go point at the sun. So they're going to go off at different angles. I sure like the spray bottle, but I do like the spray bottle. It gives a lot of texture to the drawing. The bottom half is starting to dry. I probably should have left it somewhat like that because it's got a nice feel to it. But did I? Probably not. Here I'm going to put in 3 bushes. I thought, 3 is a magic number in painting. Still really wet. You can see how it's all sort of floating out. Making the main part dark. And trying to make it so that I have some warm colors and then some cool colors in it to give some contrast. I have no idea why they're different sizes, just kind of how I felt like going about it. You're probably going, this is a mess of a painting. Yeah, so far. But this is also a problem with watercolor. You don't really know what you have until the very end. And if you want, speed to the end and tell me if you thought it was any good. Again, this is about a 20-minute painting. So it's more of a sketch. 9x12 paper. I use Kilimanjaro paper, which is really great. Really soft paper. It takes the water really well. I don't know why I needed a little darker on the slope, but I thought, yeah, I need a little darker on the slope. I really like the paint on the left side there, and I probably should have left it, and it would have looked much better. But I kept adding paint. And this is one of the things you got to be really careful about as a watercolorist, is adding too much paint that it turns into mud. I don't think I have a lot of mud, but I think I've got too much wet on wet paint as I go through this painting. I shouldn't call it a painting. As I go through this sketch, I'm letting it dry a little bit. A little more color in there. I want them darker. I want the shadows in the tree to be darker. Little contrast. I do love splattering things. It gives it a little bit of motion. It looks like little plants, a little variation. I just can't get away from those trees. I keep wanting to put more and darker and darker. Well, not too bad, but I lost some of the light that was in the trees, and it's just getting to be a little dark. Adding a little bit of color. You can see how wet the paper is. Everything is just sort of floating away. I can't get any hard edges. I even have too much water. I got to pick some of it up and get rid of it. So most people would let it dry. But this paper takes forever to dry, so I just kept painting. I like the wet and wet, but this might have been a little too wet and wet. So now I'm doing some really long shadows. Not so sure about my sun. I like the spray bottle because it gives it some texture, and I like the drops. It's still flat though. I usually like to paint on a bit of an angle so things run down and look a little bit better. Probably the nuttiest idea I had was, why don't I go back and fix the sun? Well, don't do that. I should have left it, but you know, there's this old adage in painting, just one more thing before I quit. And I should have stopped a little bit further back. Letting it dry a bit. Still playing with it. Looks like a holy mess right now. I love putting more color in those trees. Okay. Well, one of the things that really helps watercolor is to let it dry and then remove the tape. The white around the painting really adds to a painting and gives it a finished look. So, did I save it, or was it a waste of time? An impressionistic watercolor of 3 bushes, bit of a slope, strange looking sun. But is it interesting to look at? It's got a lot going on in there. Maybe a little too much. First full watercolor demo. I'll get better.